Selective softness. Some people master the art of caring, but only when it's convenient. They arrive with perfect timing at first. They listen with genuine attention, offer words that land exactly where they need to. Their comfort wraps around you like something you've been waiting for, something that finally feels real. Then the pattern emerges, subtle but unmistakable. When your pain sits lightly, when your needs require little more than acknowledgement, they're fully present. Their warmth flows freely when the emotional weight stays manageable, when being there costs them nothing they weren't already willing to give. But let the hurt deepen. Let the moment demand more than surface comfort or rehearsed reassurance. Watch how quickly something shifts behind their eyes. The silence stretches longer. Their responses grow mechanical. Impatience creeps into their voice like an unwelcome guest they can't quite hide. Conversations cut short without explanation. The comfort fades just as you start to lean. Their presence becomes a question mark rather than a certainty. So you learn to adapt. You read the room before you speak. You measure your emotions against their comfort level, editing your truth to fit their capacity. You perfect the art of asking for just enough. Never too much, never too long. You stop expecting comfort that endures past their breaking point. And slowly, insidiously, you begin questioning whether your feelings are excessive, even when they're entirely human. This isn't simple emotional neglect. It's conditional availability disguised as care. Authentic care doesn't negotiate terms. It doesn't vanish when discomfort enters the room or when showing up demands more than easy gestures. True care remains, especially when remaining is hard. The emotional ledger. Some people don't give freely. They keep meticulous score. Initially, it masquerades as pure generosity. They exceed expectations, arriving before you've even realized you needed them. They showcase their devotion with careful consistency, sometimes announcing their care before you've had the chance to doubt it. But gradually, the true nature reveals itself. Every thoughtful gesture gets quietly catalogued, not announced, not immediately weaponized, simply archived for future reference. Then comes the moment when you're struggling, or you establish a necessary boundary, or you reach for something more. Suddenly, the ledger springs open with surgical precision. After everything I've done for you? I've always been there. You think I don't care? You're denied the right to feel hurt without first auditing your gratitude. You cannot ask for more until you've properly accounted for every previous kindness, proving you understand the accumulated value of their investment. This isn't love, it's emotional bookkeeping. Their care arrives with invisible strings attached, each gesture carrying an unspoken price tag. When affection becomes transactional, connection transforms into obligation. You catch yourself preemptively justifying your needs, cushioning requests with excessive appreciation, offering gratitude where you should have been allowed to simply feel and be heard. Genuine relationships don't operate on hidden scorecards. When someone loves authentically, they close the books completely. Split connection. Some people don't alter their feelings. They alter their treatment, calibrating their warmth to match the audience, the setting, the role they're currently performing. In solitude, they're present and tender. Their attention feels genuine, unhurried, but introduce certain friends into the equation and they retreat behind invisible walls. In public spaces, their tone acquires an unfamiliar edge. At family gatherings, you might as well be furniture. You don't vanish, you're just trimmed down, adjusted, softened for the setting. A different version of your connection emerges in each context because they become someone entirely different depending on who's watching. The pattern crystallizes with uncomfortable clarity. What they embrace in private becomes a source of embarrassment around others. Your shared language falls flat in mixed company. The intimacy that felt solid suddenly can't survive a change of scenery. When you dare to mention this fracturing, you're met with dismissive explanations. That's just how I act around them, or the classic deflection, you're reading into it. So you learn to code switch. You gauge the room before you speak, measuring your authenticity against their comfort level with the current audience. You keep interactions surface level, speak less frequently, avoid anything that might create tension, because somehow you've become the one who's making things weird. But the quiet strain accumulates. You're not being loved consistently. You're being asked to participate in a relationship that only functions under specific conditions, like a plant that can only survive in artificial light. Authentic love doesn't require different versions for different venues. It doesn't need constant translation or context-specific editing. And it never leaves you questioning which iteration of the connection reflects the truth. Explaining the obvious. Sometimes, disrespect doesn't come as an insult or an outburst. It comes as a pattern you have to keep pointing out. Things so basic, you feel strange even having to say them. Like letting you know when they're running late, not changing plans without asking, not brushing off your boundaries like they're up for negotiation. It catches you off guard at first. You raise it gently, thinking maybe they didn't realize. Maybe no one ever explained how that could feel, and they seem open. They nod. You think it's handled, but then it happens again, and again. And each time you explain a little more carefully, a little more clearly, as if the issue was just a misunderstanding waiting to be fixed. Eventually, the weight of repeating yourself becomes its own kind of silence, because nothing changes. You start to realize you're not teaching them. You're just doing the emotional labor they're unwilling to do, labor they'll let you carry because it's easier than reflecting. And the more you explain, the more the burden shifts onto you, as if respect only counts when you can argue for it well enough. People who care tend to remember what matters to you. They don't change because you pushed hard enough, they change because they care enough to notice. And when that's missing, when you're always the one doing the explaining, it stops feeling like mutual understanding. It starts to feel like upkeep, and no one should have to earn the right to be treated with basic respect. Emotional labor load. Some relationships feel balanced on the surface until you look closer at who's doing the emotional work. You're the one noticing tension before it's acknowledged, the one who initiates hard conversations, the one who checks in, reads between the lines, smooths things over. It's not just your side you're managing, it's the entire emotional atmosphere. If they're upset, you step in to regulate. If something goes unspoken, you're the one who names it. You monitor the moods, anticipate their reactions, and adjust your tone to keep things from escalating. You give comfort, reassurance, patience. And when you need something, you deliver it gently, carefully, so it won't be taken the wrong way. Over time, this quiet balancing act becomes exhausting. It doesn't feel like care, it feels like containment. You're not building something together, you're holding it together, alone. The imbalance doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes it's emotional, immaturity, or avoidance, or the assumption that you'll always take the lead when things get hard. But the effect is the same. You become the emotional scaffolding holding everything up, while your own needs start slipping through the cracks. Healthy relationships involve shared labor. When only one person is doing the work, it stops being connection and starts becoming survival. Chronic interruption. This red flag is called conversational bulldozing, and it's one of the most overlooked forms of control in relationships. It starts innocently enough. You're telling a story about your day, and they cut in with, "Oh, that reminds me of when I..." You pause, let them finish, then try to continue. But before you get 3 sentences out, they're talking again. You pause, you let them finish, you try again, and again, and again. At first, you make excuses. They're excited, they have ADHD, they're just enthusiastic conversationalists. But pay attention to the pattern, because there always is one. Notice how they remember every detail of their own stories, but somehow forget you were speaking when they jump in. Watch how they can listen intently when talking to their boss or someone they want to impress, but with you, they're always ready with their next comment before you finished your thought. Here's what's really happening. They're training you to need less space. Every interruption teaches you that your words aren't worth the weight, so your stories start to shrink. Your opinions get simpler. You start editing yourself before you even speak, choosing only the thoughts that can survive being cut off. You'll start to share something meaningful, then trail off mid-sentence because you've learned that someone else's voice is always about to take over anyway. Healthy people notice when they've cut someone off, and they fix it. They ask, "Sorry, what were you saying?" They make space. They care. If someone consistently interrupts you, here's what to try. "I wasn't finished." Say it calmly, then continue your thought. If they adjust, they care. If they don't, it was never about the conversation. It was about control. Your voice deserves to exist in full sentences, complete thoughts, and finished stories. Anyone who loves you should want to hear them. Weaponized apologies. At first, they seem like they're doing the right thing. They say sorry, sometimes quickly, sometimes even in public. It sounds like accountability. And for a moment, it feels like maybe things will get better. But then you start to notice the shape of those apologies. They don't sound like understanding, they sound like strategy. I'm sorry you feel that way. I didn't mean it like that. I guess I can't say anything around you. You're left standing there, holding the same pain, but now with a twist. Now it feels like it's your fault for being hurt at all. Real apologies are about repair. These ones are about redirection. You came in with a wound, and somehow the conversation becomes about how hard it is for them to be misunderstood, about how sensitive you are, about how exhausted they feel from always being the bad guy. And when it happens enough, you start to second-guess your own responses. You delay bringing things up. You rehearse how to say it in a way that won't make them defensive. You shrink the truth into softer words, not to protect them, but to survive the apology that might follow. Because once someone learns how to apologize without meaning it, they can keep doing harm while sounding like they care. And that's not conflict resolution, that's emotional camouflage. Missing pieces. This kind of dishonesty is nearly invisible at first. They talk freely, share stories, and answer your questions with ease. But something feels off. The stories skip important parts. The timelines blur. Events are mentioned without people, feelings without context. The deeper you listen, the more you realize you're always missing a piece. You start to notice how names are avoided, how certain questions shift the mood, how their expression changes when something gets too specific. They're not lying outright, but they're not being open either. What they offer is carefully measured, just enough to seem honest, never enough to feel fully known. One day, you ask gently about something that doesn't quite add up. The response comes with a smile, a brush off, a vague answer before moving on. Nothing harsh, nothing dramatic, just a quiet signal that the door won't be opening. And slowly, you begin to adapt. You stop asking follow-up questions. You learn which topics stall the room. You hold your curiosity back and try to be content with whatever version of the truth they're willing to share. But contentment never really comes. There's a quiet unease to being kept at a distance you're not supposed to notice. You're not being trusted with the full picture. You're being handed fragments. When honesty becomes something you have to extract, something you have to work for, the relationship starts to feel like guesswork, like you're building something that looks solid but never quite settles. Because real closeness requires transparency, and connection can't grow where truth is always kept just out of reach. Unfinished business. Everyone carries some baggage into relationships. That's human. But there's a difference between having a past and being controlled by it. You start to notice it in the disproportionate reactions. A minor disagreement triggers an explosion that seems to come from somewhere else entirely. A simple question about their day is met with defensive walls that feel familiar, rehearsed. The anger isn't really about you or the moment. It's about something unresolved that you've accidentally brushed against. The patterns reveal themselves slowly. Comments that feel oddly loaded, like they're arguing with someone who isn't in the room. Emotional responses that don't match the situation but perfectly match the stories they've told you about their childhood or their ex. They shut down in the exact ways they criticize others for shutting down. They control in the same ways they claim to have been controlled. You might point this out gently, how their reaction seemed bigger than the trigger, how they're doing the thing they say they hate. But instead of curiosity or self-reflection, you're met with justification. It was your fault for bringing it up. You don't understand what they've been through. They're not like that person. This is completely different. Eventually, it becomes clear. They haven't done the work to separate their past from their present. The trauma, the learned patterns, the unprocessed hurt, it's all still active, still making decisions for them. They react to you as if you're the parent who dismissed them, the ex who betrayed them, the sibling who competed with them. You become the stand-in for unfinished business you had nothing to do with. What makes this particularly difficult is that their pain is real. The wounds that created these patterns were genuine. But understanding where something comes from doesn't make it less harmful when it's directed at you. And someone who can't recognize when their past is hijacking their present isn't equipped to prevent it from happening again. Because healing isn't automatic with time, without intentional work to interrupt these patterns, wounded people tend to recreate the dynamics they know, even the ones that hurt them. And until they can see the difference between then and now, between you and them, every relationship becomes an opportunity to relive old pain instead of create something new. The joke is always you. It starts small, a comment about how long it takes you to get ready, a playful jab about something you're insecure about, your job, your family, your habits. Everyone laughs, and so do you. You don't want to seem uptight. You tell yourself it's fine, it's just teasing. But it keeps happening. Different settings, different people. But somehow, the joke always circles back to you. It's always your turn to be laughed at. And when you speak up or go quiet, you're told you're taking it too seriously, that you need to lighten up, that it's just how they show affection. So you try to be okay with it. You try not to flinch, but deep down, something shifts. You start paying closer attention to your flaws, sometimes even before they mention them. Just to prepare, just to soften the blow. You become careful with how you dress, what you say, what you share. You adjust yourself quietly, hoping it'll give them less to grab onto next time. This kind of humor isn't playful, it's positioning. It puts you one step lower in the social dynamic. It tells other people how to see you, and over time, it tells you too. When someone loves you, they don't use your vulnerabilities for sport. They don't put you on display to get a reaction. And if the punchline is always something you didn't offer freely, then it was never really a joke. Too sensitive, too often. This red flag doesn't show up as yelling or obvious disrespect. It's quieter than that. It happens when you express something honestly, maybe discomfort, maybe hurt, and the response you get isn't curiosity or care, it's dismissal, a joke, a sigh, a shift in the room that tells you your feelings have made things inconvenient. It doesn't have to be every time, just often enough that you start to notice a pattern. You're told you're taking things too seriously, that you always read into things, that no one else would have reacted like that. So instead of feeling understood, you start feeling judged for having feelings at all. And this changes the way you speak. You begin holding back, because even honest reactions start to feel like the wrong answer. You scan your responses in advance. You shrink your language. You tell softer versions of the truth just to avoid being told you're overreacting. This isn't about tone or communication style. It's a pattern that teaches you to doubt your own perception. It leaves you filtering everything through the question, is this even worth bringing up? Even when it clearly is. And the more you do that, the less seen you feel until your silence starts to replace you. In love with potential. Sometimes it feels like love, but is not rooted in what's happening. It's built on what you hope might happen later. You see the moments of kindness, the flashes of depth, the promises they make when things are good, and you hold on to those pieces like a blueprint, not for who they are, but for who they could become. You start filling in the blanks, explaining away the gaps, telling yourself they just need time, that they'll open up more, that they'll grow into the kind of partner you know they're capable of being. And maybe they will, but maybe they won't. And in the meantime, you're loving a version of them that doesn't quite exist yet. The problem is never having hope. When your hope starts doing the heavy lifting, when you're justifying pain with possibility, when you're staying because of a future you've imagined rather than a present you actually feel safe in. It's easy to confuse potential with progress, to mistake the idea of someone for the experience of being with them. But love can't thrive in maybes. If you're always waiting for them to become who you need, you may already know. They're not there now. Walking on eggshells. Everyone has moments when emotions run high and regret follows quickly after. But there's a vast difference between occasional heated moments and living with someone whose anger feels like a loaded weapon you never know when might go off. It starts with the disproportionate reactions. A forgotten text message sparks a tirade. A different opinion becomes a personal attack on their character. Minor inconveniences, traffic, a closed restaurant, a delayed package unleash fury that shakes the room. The intensity doesn't match the trigger, but the explosion is always complete. Raised voices, slammed doors, sometimes broken objects, words designed to wound, delivered with precision. What's most unsettling is the unpredictability. The landmines seem to shift daily, impossible to map or avoid. Something that was fine yesterday becomes grounds for an eruption today. Living with this volatility means constantly calculating, scanning their mood, choosing words carefully, editing thoughts before they become sentences. The aftermath follows a pattern. Sometimes there's immediate regret and promises it won't happen again. Sometimes there's justification. The partner pushed them too far, should have known better. But genuine accountability or sustained change rarely follows. Living with this volatility forces adaptation. Voices get quieter, opinions become suggestions, personal needs take a back seat. An internal early warning system develops, constantly monitoring their mood. The relationship becomes crisis management rather than connection. The most dangerous part is what this reveals about their relationship with control. Someone who can't regulate emotional responses in low-stakes situations reveals what happens when stakes are higher. When they feel truly threatened or challenged, the explosions escalate. Emotional regulation requires choosing responses over impulses. Someone who consistently chooses destruction over self-control reveals exactly how safe others are when emotions run high. Mood manager. Some dynamics don't feel unfair at first. You just notice that their moods seem to shape the room. When they're quiet, you speak more gently. When they're tense, you start choosing your words more carefully. You're not asked to do this. It just becomes part of how you relate to them. Their tone shifts, and you adjust without thinking. Their silence lingers, and you begin scanning for what might have gone wrong. You go back through recent moments, trying to figure out what triggered the change. Over time, your focus starts to shift away from the relationship and toward emotional damage control. You're constantly paying attention to how they seem, predicting their reactions, avoiding topics that might throw things off, and when something feels off, you take it on as your responsibility, even if it had nothing to do with you. When you're upset, it feels harder to bring it up. You wait until their mood is right. You reword your feelings to sound less direct. You minimize your own reactions, hoping to avoid making things heavier. After a while, you're doing all the adjusting, all the buffering, all the regulating. It can feel like patience or maturity or even strength. But being the emotionally steady one doesn't mean absorbing everything quietly. If your presence is always the one making room, then your needs have nowhere to land. One-way comfort. Comfort in a relationship should go both ways. When something hard happens, you show up for them. You ask how they're doing. You sit with their silence, or talk them through their frustration, or just listen when they need to let something out. You make space without being asked. But when it's you who's overwhelmed or tired or not okay, something shifts. Suddenly, there's less room. They're distracted, distant, uncomfortable. The same care you offer doesn't seem to make its way back to you. At first, you don't think much of it. Not everyone knows how to show support in the same way. You give them the benefit of the doubt. But after a while, the pattern becomes clear. They lean on you, but you have nowhere to lean. You're the safe place, but you don't get one in return. So you start keeping your bad days to yourself. You filter what you share. You stop expecting a response that feels supportive, and start preparing yourself to carry it alone. This doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it's a lack of awareness. Sometimes it's emotional immaturity. But when care only moves in one direction, it stops being care. It becomes an imbalance. And that imbalance is hard to name because you're not being ignored entirely. You're just not being held. Self-erosion. It can start with something small, a skipped hangout, a hobby you stop mentioning, a part of your routine that quietly disappears. At first, it feels like compromise. You want things to work. You want to show up, to be available, to make space. So when they seem a little off about a plan you made with a friend, you cancel it. When they don't share your interests, you downplay them. When they need more of your time, you start pulling it from places that used to belong to you. Over time, your days begin to shape themselves around what they prefer. There's no ultimatum, no clear line, just an ongoing shift, where it starts to feel easier to adapt than to hold your ground, less explaining, fewer small tensions, a smoother path forward. And the more it happens, the more parts of you go quiet. The routines, the relationships, the pieces of your life that didn't revolve around them start to fade. You're still there, but your outline feels thinner, like something got traded for stability, even if no one asked you to give it up. It doesn't always feel like loss. Sometimes it just feels like maintenance. But slowly, the version of you that existed before starts to feel further away. Privacy breach. It might start as a question. Who were you texting? Why didn't you pick up? Can I see your phone for a second? It doesn't always sound accusatory. Sometimes it's said casually, almost playfully, but it's not really about the answer. It's about access. About getting closer in a way that skips over trust and goes straight to control. They want your passwords, your location, a look through your messages, just to feel included. And if you hesitate, even for a second, it becomes a problem. You must be hiding something. You must not be committed. You must have something to explain. So you start feeling uneasy. Even when you have nothing to hide. You start over-explaining, hoping it will keep the questions from coming. And maybe they don't even see it that way. Maybe they think closeness means no boundaries at all, but the result is the same. Your space shrinks, and their comfort depends on knowing everything. But privacy isn't a sign of secrecy, it's a form of self, and in a healthy relationship, it's still allowed to exist. Depth dodging. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace. It shows up when things start to get real, when the conversation moves past surface updates and small jokes, and into anything that actually matters. That's when they pull back. You bring up something vulnerable, something that asks for presence or reflection, or even just a pause, and suddenly they're distracted, looking at their phone, making a joke, changing the subject. They don't get angry, they don't argue. They just disappear behind a wall you can't quite see, but always feel. At first, it's easy to brush off. Not everyone's a deep talker. Maybe they need time. Maybe they weren't raised to have these kinds of conversations. But eventually, a pattern sets in. You're the only one opening up, the only one asking real questions, the only one showing what's underneath. And every time they dodge, it teaches you that intimacy has limits here, that you can be close, but only to a point. That if you need to talk about something heavy, something real, you're going to have to do it alone. Relationships don't need constant emotional intensity, but when one person consistently avoids depth, what you're building starts to feel thin. You're sharing time and space, but not much else. And over time, that distance starts to feel like absence. Guilt as leverage. There's a kind of guilt that doesn't come from hurting someone directly. It appears when we simply haven't done what another person wanted. We might say we're tired, and they go quiet. We set a boundary, and they act as if we've pulled away. It's not about what they say, it's how the air feels, how the space between us changes when we decline. This is noticed in small ways. The way someone deflates, the sense that something is now just off between you, and so we begin to adjust. We find ourselves over-explaining. We offer things before they've even asked. We agree to plans we truly don't have the energy for. They don't always ask for more, but the pull is there anyway. A no causes the energy to shift, not loudly but enough to make us hesitate, to make us rethink things the next time. And the more this happens, the harder it becomes to know if we're truly being supportive. Or if we're just trying to avoid that specific feeling of guilt that consistently appears when we aren't available in the way they expect us to be. Care should feel like a shared space. It shouldn't feel like a test that we keep trying to pass, always by giving more than we comfortably can. Memory twisting. Sometimes you encounter a situation where someone seems to recall events or conversations in a way that doesn't quite match what happened. It's not a simple misunderstanding. It feels more deliberate, as if their memory is being shaped to suit a particular narrative, often one where they emerge looking better or you look worse. You might find yourself confidently remembering a detail only for them to present a completely different version. They might twist something you said, subtly changing its meaning, or recall a promise that was never truly made. It leaves you feeling disoriented, questioning your own recollection. Trying to correct them can be difficult. They might dismiss your perspective or insist with such conviction that their version is the truth, it makes you second-guess yourself. The more you try to clarify, the more confused the original interaction becomes. This creates a sense of instability. It undermines trust, making it hard to rely on shared history. Every conversation becomes a potential minefield because the facts themselves seem to be fluid, shifting to serve their immediate need or to secure an advantage in an argument. Over time, it can make you doubt your own perceptions, wondering if your memory is truly reliable. Competing with your joy. You share something good that happened. Maybe it's a promotion, an exciting trip, a new relationship, or a personal achievement. You're feeling happy, genuinely joyful, and you want to share that feeling with someone. But instead of mirroring your excitement, a strange shift occurs. Their immediate reaction isn't quite celebratory. They might quickly pivot to something positive in their own life that outshines yours. Or they might minimize your news, pointing out a flaw or a potential problem you hadn't considered. Sometimes they'll even bring up a past failure of yours or a success of theirs that happened long ago, somehow making it relevant to your present happiness. It feels like a subtle race, one you didn't even know you were running. Your moment of happiness, which you hoped to share, is instead met with a need to either one-up it or diminish it. The feeling of shared joy evaporates, replaced by a quiet sense of disappointment or confusion. This pattern makes it hard to be truly open about your good fortune. You start to anticipate the subtle deflection, the quick turn of the conversation away from your success. Over time, it can make you hesitant to share your triumphs, because the act of sharing becomes less about connection and more about navigating an unspoken competition, leaving you feeling alone in your happiness. Escalate and erase. When a disagreement arises with certain people, it doesn't stay small. Instead, it quickly blows up. A minor misunderstanding can instantly become a heated argument filled with raised voices, accusations, or intense emotional reactions. The conflict expands rapidly, consuming everything in its path. During these moments, it feels overwhelming. Emotions run high, and the intensity makes it hard to think clearly or resolve anything constructively. It feels like the entire relationship is at stake, as if the world is ending over a small point of contention. Then, just as quickly as it escalated, it's over. The next day, or even a few hours later, the person acts as if nothing significant happened. They might be cheerful, loving, or completely normal. When you try to bring up the intensity of the conflict, they might minimize it, saying you're overreacting or that it wasn't a big deal. They might even act confused about why you're still dwelling on it. This pattern is disorienting. It prevents true resolution because the actual impact of the escalation is never acknowledged. You're left holding the emotional aftermath of a major blow-up, while the other person seems to have completely erased it from their memory. This leaves you feeling unheard, invalidated, and perpetually on edge, never knowing when the next minor issue will trigger another intense, quickly forgotten explosion. Shadow partner. The stories come in fragments, always painted in broad strokes. Every ex was crazy. Every breakup was their fault. Every relationship ended because the other person couldn't handle them or didn't understand what they needed. The details are sparse, but the theme is consistent. They were always the reasonable one, always the victim of someone else's instability or inadequacy. At first, it feels like empathy is the right response. You listen to tales of betrayal, manipulation, and unreasonable demands from former partners. You offer comfort and understanding. But as more stories emerge, a troubling pattern begins to surface. The cast of characters changes, but their role never does. They're perpetually misunderstood, perpetually wronged, perpetually blameless. You start to notice what's missing from these narratives. There's no self-reflection, no acknowledgement of their own contributions to these failures, no growth from one relationship to the next. No learning. The same conflicts repeat with different people, but somehow it's never their responsibility to examine or change. When you gently suggest that perhaps some situations were more complex, or that relationships usually involve fault on both sides, the response is swift. Defensiveness. Hurt that you would question their version of events. Sometimes anger that you're taking their side, or not supporting them. The conversation shuts down, and you learn not to probe deeper. But the unease grows. If everyone else was the problem, what does that say about their capacity for accountability? If every relationship ended the same way, what happens when conflicts arise between you? The pattern suggests an answer you don't want to consider, that when things go wrong, you too will become another story in their collection, another crazy ex who couldn't handle them. Because people who refuse to own their part in relationship failures rarely change the behaviors that cause them, and someone who can't see their own contribution to a pattern of broken connections is likely to repeat that pattern again and again, leaving others to wonder what they missed until it's too late. My way or the highway. Healthy relationships require give and take, meeting halfway through the inevitable conflicts and differences that arise. But when someone consistently refuses to compromise, the relationship transforms from partnership into something else entirely. It shows up first in their certainty. They always know the best restaurant, the right route, the correct way to load the dishwasher. Discussions become lectures, suggestions are met with dismissal. Their perspective dominates every decision, not because they've made better arguments, but because they've made it clear that other viewpoints simply don't matter. The pattern becomes evident in both major and minor situations. A conversation about vacation destinations becomes a unilateral announcement. Financial decisions are presented as foregone conclusions. Even changing dinner plans can trigger outright hostility because their determination to have things their way is non-negotiable. The content of the disagreement matters less than the fact that disagreement occurred at all. What makes this particularly insidious is how it masquerades as strength or leadership. They frame their inflexibility as having standards, their dismissiveness as being decisive. They present their unwillingness to budge as knowing what they want, when what they're really demonstrating is an inability to see their partner as an equal with valid input. Living with this rigidity means constantly deferring. Ideas get offered tentatively, then withdrawn when met with resistance. Preferences become suggestions, then fade into silence. The relationship develops an unspoken hierarchy where one person's comfort, desires, and worldview consistently take precedence over the other's brussance. The deeper issue reveals itself over time. This resistance to compromise stems from a fundamental inability to hold space for another person's experience. Someone who can't genuinely consider that their partner might have valuable insights, different needs, or equally valid preferences is showing a profound lack of empathy and respect. Because compromise requires seeing the other person as a full human being with legitimate desires that matter as much as one's own. Someone who refuses this basic acknowledgement is choosing control over connection, dominance over partnership, and that choice reveals exactly how they view the relationship, not as a collaboration between equals, but as a kingdom where they rule. Fear, not love. Sometimes, staying in a relationship has little to do with affection or a desire to be with the other person. Instead, a deeper, more pervasive feeling takes root: fear. You might recognize that the connection no longer brings you joy or even peace, but the idea of leaving feels far more terrifying than staying. This fear isn't typically about love, it's about the unknown. It might be the fear of being alone, a deep-seated anxiety about facing life without this familiar presence, no matter how troubled that presence is. There could be a fear of financial instability or losing shared resources. Often, it's the fear of upheaval, of disrupting your routine, your social circles, or the life you've built, even if that life feels increasingly unfulfilling. You might also dread the other person's reaction to your departure, fearing their anger, their despair, or their attempts to manipulate you into staying. This kind of fear acts like a powerful anchor, holding you in place long after the emotional connection has frayed. You rationalize staying, creating reasons that skirt the truth of your feelings. You might tell yourself it's easier to endure the current situation than to face the immense effort and uncertainty of change. The realization that fear, rather than love, is the primary force keeping you tied to someone can be incredibly isolating. It means you're not choosing to be there out of genuine desire, but out of a powerful avoidance of something else. This reality leaves you feeling trapped, with a profound sense of resignation rather than connection. Making excuses for the worst. You find yourself doing something you never thought you would, explaining away behavior that's clearly unacceptable. When a friend or family member expresses concern about how you're being treated, you immediately jump to their defense. You rationalize their outbursts, their cutting remarks, or their unreliability. This isn't about giving someone the benefit of the doubt. It's a more ingrained habit of inventing reasons for actions that are causing you pain. They're just stressed, you might say, or they didn't mean it that way, or it's because of what happened to them. You focus on external circumstances or internal struggles they might be facing, rather than acknowledging the direct impact of their behavior on you. This constant process of justification takes a quiet toll. It slowly erodes your own sense of what's acceptable. By consistently finding excuses for their worst moments, you inadvertently lower your own standards for how you deserve to be treated. It becomes easier to make allowances than to confront the uncomfortable truth of their actions. The more you rationalize, the more blurred the lines become. This cycle leaves you isolated, as others may struggle to understand your explanations. More importantly, it prevents the other person from ever truly facing the consequences of their behavior, trapping both of you in a pattern where their worst actions are perpetually forgiven but never truly addressed. The investment trap. You've put time into this, energy, hope. You've had conversations that felt like progress, moments that felt like turning points. You've explained things more than once, tried new ways of showing up, given them the benefit of the doubt, again and again. And even now, when something feels wrong more often than right, you catch yourself thinking about how much you've already given, how far you've already come, how much you've already lost, and how hard it would be to start over. It doesn't feel like staying. It feels like protecting the effort you've already made. That's the trap. You stay, not because it's getting better, but because leaving would make all that effort feel wasted. So you keep working, keep waiting. Keep hoping something will shift, even if it hasn't in a long time. But a healthy relationship doesn't rely on what you've already poured into it. It earns your presence in the present, not just your history. And if the only reason you're still in it is because you've been in it this long, that's not a sign of loyalty, that's a sign of exhaustion. Fast-tracked intimacy. Someone new enters your life, and almost immediately, the connection feels incredibly intense. They shower you with attention, compliments, and grand gestures. They talk about a shared future very early on, expressing how deeply they understand you, how unique this connection is, how perfect you are for each other. It feels overwhelming, exhilarating, and almost too good to be true. They want to spend all their time with you. They declare strong feelings quickly, using terms of endearment that usually take months, if not years, to develop. It's like a spotlight is suddenly on you, making you feel completely seen and adored. You might find yourself swept up in it, believing this is the deep, immediate bond you've always wanted. You start to open up, sharing your hopes and vulnerabilities, because their intense interest feels like genuine love and acceptance. But then, just as suddenly, the intense attention starts to wane. The frequent communication slows. The grand gestures disappear. The warm declarations of affection become sparse or disappear entirely. They start to pull away, leaving you confused, hurt, and questioning what changed. The intense connection you felt was building seems to vanish, leaving behind a void and the unsettling realization that the initial rush wasn't the foundation of a lasting bond, but a temporary performance. Vulnerability as ammo. When you share something deeply personal with someone, you expect it to be held with care. This could be a past hurt, an insecurity, a fear, or even a quiet hope. It's a moment of trust, a step taken to deepen a connection. But then, in a disagreement or a moment of tension, that shared vulnerability gets brought up. Not as a point of understanding or empathy, but twisted, used against you. A fear you confided might be thrown back as evidence of your weakness. An insecurity becomes a label. A past mistake, once shared in confidence, is suddenly weaponized to undermine your present argument. It feels like a betrayal, a profound breach of trust. The very things you offered in good faith, hoping for connection, are instead turned into tools for control or manipulation. It makes you instantly regret ever opening up, wishing you had kept those parts of yourself hidden. This pattern makes genuine closeness impossible. It teaches you to build walls, to guard your inner world, because the risk of having your deepest self exploited becomes too high. You learn that honesty can come at a steep price, leaving you isolated even when surrounded by others. Surface level interest. You might share details about your day, your passions, or a problem you're wrestling with, and they listen, they respond. But something feels missing. Their interest rarely goes deeper than the surface. They don't ask follow-up questions that probe your feelings or the complexities of your inner world. The conversations tend to stay light, focusing on facts, logistics, or external events. When you try to express a deeper emotion, a significant worry, or a profound dream, their engagement feels thin. They might offer a quick, generic response or steer the conversation back to something more impersonal. This creates a peculiar loneliness, even when you're speaking. You feel heard in a literal sense, but not truly understood or seen. It's as if there's a barrier to real intimacy, a reluctance on their part to genuinely engage with the nuances of who you are beneath the surface. This pattern can leave you feeling emotionally isolated within the relationship. You might stop sharing your deeper thoughts, your vulnerabilities, or the rich landscape of your inner life, because the consistent lack of genuine curiosity signals that those parts of you aren't truly welcomed or valued. A fulfilling relationship thrives on mutual curiosity and a genuine desire to understand each other's depths, not just their daily activities. Delayed by default. You might notice a consistent pattern. When it comes to plans, decisions, or especially important conversations, there's always a delay. It's not an occasional oversight, but a default mode of operation. Appointments might be postponed last minute, replies to crucial questions take days, or serious discussions are perpetually put off until later. This creates a pervasive sense of unreliability. You find yourself waiting, putting your own life on hold, or repeatedly following up for clarity that never quite solidifies. When important topics do finally come up, they often feel rushed or forced, rather than genuinely engaged with. This isn't always about malice. Sometimes it's avoidance, disorganization, or a lack of prioritization. Regardless of the reason, the effect on the relationship is clear. Promises feel fragile, plans feel tentative, and the emotional labor of pushing things forward constantly falls to you. This pattern erodes trust and causes significant frustration. You learn to expect delays, to manage your expectations downward, and to carry the burden of initiating and chasing. A healthy relationship thrives on mutual respect for time, and a willingness to engage with important issues directly, not a consistent pattern of procrastination and deferral. Image-first connection. From the outside, your relationship appears perfect, even enviable. Your social media posts are filled with smiling faces, shared adventures, and loving captions. Friends and acquaintances comment on how great you seem together, how lucky you are, how ideal your connection is. But behind the carefully constructed facade, the reality is starkly different. When you're alone, the relationship feels hollow, strained, or emotionally distant. The warmth you project for an audience vanishes. Conversations might be superficial, intimacy scarce, or underlying tensions simmer just beneath the surface. The connection feels more like a performance for external validation than a genuine bond lived privately. This creates a profound dissonance. You invest energy in maintaining a public image that doesn't reflect your private experience. The external approval you receive feels empty, knowing it's based on a curated lie. You might find yourself prioritizing what looks good over what feels good. This pattern slowly isolates you. You're trapped in a performance, unable to share the true struggles of the relationship with others for fear of shattering the illusion. A healthy relationship thrives on authentic connection and genuine shared experience, not on a polished external image maintained at the expense of its internal reality. Choked by jealousy. There's a subtle, then increasingly overt, tension that builds around your connections outside the relationship. Your partner's attention feels less like care and more like constant surveillance. An intense, often irrational jealousy that begins to tighten its grip on your life. They might frequently question your whereabouts, interrogate you about who you're with, or express anger when you spend time with friends or family without them. You might find them monitoring your phone, checking your messages, or scrutinizing your social media activity. What begins as subtle possessiveness can escalate into accusations, demands, and attempts to control your movements and interactions. The atmosphere becomes suffocating. You feel constantly on trial, as if you need to prove your loyalty or intentions at all times. The joy you once found in independent friendships or activities becomes tainted by their suspicion, making you feel guilty for simply living your own life. While the pattern stems from their own insecurity, its impact on you is immense. It starves you of freedom, trust, and external support, slowly isolating you from the very people and activities that bring you joy. The jealousy becomes a noose that gradually tightens, cutting off your connections to the world beyond them until you can barely breathe independently. The comfort cage. It's a curious human tendency to cling to what's known, even when it's hurting you. A relationship might persist not because it brings joy or fosters growth, but simply because it's established territory. You might find yourself living with predictable unhappiness, quiet dismissal, or recurring conflict. Yet these known patterns offer a strange sense of security. The existing discomfort feels less daunting than venturing into the unknown. The fear runs deeper than just psychological comfort. It's the overwhelming prospect of rebuilding everything from scratch. The sheer weight of constructing a new daily routine, finding a different place to live, rebuilding a social circle, navigating unfamiliar territory without established pathways. The profound uncertainty of what a new beginning might bring, and the vast energy it will demand, feels paralyzing. This powerful combination, the pull of familiarity and the dread of starting over, can overshadow any current unhappiness. You might find yourself enduring predictable difficulties, rationalizing that it's not that bad, or that all relationships have their problems. The stark truth is that you're choosing predictable discomfort over the uncertain path to genuine well-being. You remain anchored not by choice or connection, but by the daunting prospect of having to construct an entirely new life. This reluctance becomes a trap where fear of the unknown outweighs the desire for authentic happiness, leaving you stuck in a relationship shaped more by inertia than intention. Emotional dumping. You often find yourself in a very specific role within this relationship, the primary receptacle for their emotional distress. When they are stressed, angry, or upset, they offload their feelings onto you, often in intense, prolonged sessions. You become their emotional sounding board, their confessor, their outlet. This happens with little regard for your own emotional capacity or current state. They share their grievances, their frustrations, their anxieties, often in great detail, consuming the conversation and your energy. While you might initially offer empathy, the exchange rarely becomes reciprocal. When it's your turn to need support, or express your own struggles, their availability often vanishes, the conversation shifts, they become distracted, or their interest simply wanes. The listening ear they demanded from you is rarely extended in return. This creates a profound imbalance. You bear the weight of their emotional burdens without the reciprocal support that a healthy connection provides. You feel depleted, used as an emotional sponge, and increasingly resentful. A balanced relationship involves mutual emotional support, a give and take where both individuals feel heard and sustained, not a one-sided pattern of constant emotional offloading. Future faking. In this relationship, there's a recurring pattern of grand promises and elaborate plans for the future that never quite materialize. They speak passionately about us moving somewhere, getting married, starting a venture, or making significant changes to their behavior. These visions are often detailed and compelling, designed to inspire hope and renewed commitment. These promises surface particularly during difficult times when doubts arise or when you express dissatisfaction. They offer a vivid picture of a better tomorrow, implicitly or explicitly suggesting that if you just hold on, if you just trust them, all these wonderful things will come to pass. Yet, as time goes on, these future plans remain just that, plans. The deadlines pass, the changes never happen, and the grand visions remain perpetually out of reach. There's always a new excuse, a new delay, a new reason why it can't happen right now, but definitely soon. This pattern is a form of powerful manipulation. It keeps you tethered to the relationship by dangling a carrot of a better future that is never intended to be delivered. You stay, not for the reality of the present, but for the illusion of what could be. A healthy relationship builds trust through consistent action and honest engagement in the present, not through a cycle of unfulfilled promises and perpetually delayed hopes. Financial control. You might find your partner constantly monitoring your spending, questioning every purchase, or demanding detailed explanations for how you use money. The oversight becomes pervasive and controlling, extending far beyond reasonable financial discussions. They might give you an allowance, even if you earn your own money, or refuse to give you access to shared funds, even for necessities. The control can escalate to preventing you from working, sabotaging your job, or dictating where and how you can earn money. They might insist that all assets remain in their name, or limit your access to bank accounts and financial information, making it impossible for you to make independent financial decisions. The result is complete financial dependency. You lose your autonomy, becoming reliant on them for basic needs. Your ability to live, to leave, or even to buy necessities becomes tied to their discretion, creating a stark power imbalance. Financial control is a profound form of coercive abuse that leaves you feeling trapped and disempowered. Even when you recognize the relationship is unhealthy, money becomes the chain that keeps you bound to a situation you might otherwise have the strength to leave. Unspoken needs. In some connections, expressing personal needs feels almost impossible, not from lack of desires or failure to recognize boundaries, but because the very thought of voicing them carries immediate risk. There's an expectation of dismissal, annoyance, or the uncomfortable feeling of being a burden. This happens when someone has learned that their needs create problems. Past requests were met with sighs, eye rolls, or lectures about being high maintenance. Simple asks for attention, affection, or consideration got framed as demands or neediness. Over time, the message became clear. Having needs makes them difficult to love. So the needs go underground. Subtle hints replace direct requests, hoping the other person will somehow intuit what's missing. Constant adjustments become the norm, sacrificing comfort and well-being to avoid the perceived hassle of asking or the sting of potential rejection. This creates a profound imbalance. One person's needs consistently take precedence while the others remain perpetually unmet. The silence around unspoken desires fosters deep unfulfillment and quiet resentment. There's a constant ache for things that can't be articulated, needs that feel too risky to voice. The relationship might appear peaceful on the surface, but it lacks genuine reciprocity. One person remains perpetually unseen, carrying their needs as heavy, internal burdens while waiting for someone else to notice what they can't bring themselves to say aloud. What creates this silence is living with someone who treats their partner's needs as inconveniences rather than opportunities for connection. When basic requests for care, attention, or consideration consistently get met with resistance or guilt-tripping, people learn to stop asking. And a relationship where someone feels they can't safely express their needs has already failed at its most fundamental purpose. Pushed past your number. You might have clearly stated a boundary, a limit on your time, your emotional capacity, or a personal space that needs respect. You believe you've been clear, that you've drawn a line. Yet you find this boundary is consistently disregarded. It's not just a misunderstanding. They might directly ignore your request, push past your comfort zone, or subtly mock your stated limit, perhaps calling you sensitive or too rigid. They might make a joke about it or simply proceed as if you never said anything at all. The line you drew is crossed again and again, leaving you feeling unheard and violated. This creates a profound sense of powerlessness as your attempts to define your own space or needs are systematically undermined, teaching you that your no means very little in the relationship. You might stop setting boundaries altogether or feel a growing resentment for the constant intrusions. The pattern signals a deep disrespect for your autonomy. Your limits are not seen as valid, but as obstacles to be circumvented or bulldozed. When someone consistently pushes past your clearly stated boundaries, they're showing you that your comfort and consent are less important than their desires. The message becomes clear. Your voice doesn't carry weight in this dynamic. Passive aggression. You sense a subtle undercurrent of tension or resentment in the relationship, but it's rarely expressed directly. Instead, anger or frustration manifests through indirect, often confusing behaviors. They might agree to something then forget to do it, arrive late without apology, or use sarcasm disguised as humor to deliver a thinly veiled insult. This isn't about clear disagreement, it's about a persistent, covert expression of negative feelings. You might experience deliberate procrastination on shared tasks, consistent feigned misunderstandings, or prolonged periods of silent treatment where the reason is never explicitly stated. You're left to guess, to interpret hints, and to feel the sting of their unaddressed resentment. This creates a deeply frustrating and confusing dynamic. You can feel their displeasure, but you can't address it directly because it's never openly acknowledged. Attempts to confront the issue often lead to denial or further evasiveness, leaving you feeling unheard and perpetually grappling with unspoken anger. This pattern prevents genuine conflict resolution and open communication. It forces you to constantly read between the lines, making assumptions about their true feelings. A healthy relationship resolves conflict through direct, honest communication, allowing for genuine understanding and growth rather than through a draining cycle of indirect hostility and unresolved resentment. Micromanaged identity. It's not that your partner explicitly dictates who you should be. They don't directly tell you to change your personality or interests. Instead, it's a more insidious process. You find yourself subtly, or sometimes overtly, corrected, critiqued, or met with disapproval when you express parts of yourself that don't fit their preferred version of you. You might share an opinion, wear a certain outfit, express a spontaneous emotion, or pursue a new interest, only for them to offer a pointed critique, a dismissive glance, or a subtle comment that suggests you've somehow missed the mark. It's like you're being constantly nudged back into a pre-approved mold without ever being explicitly told what that mold is. This creates a pervasive sense of self-consciousness. You become acutely aware of how you're perceived, constantly self-editing to avoid their quiet disapproval. You learn to anticipate what they will accept and what will trigger their correctional gaze, leading you to suppress genuine impulses and expressions. This pattern slowly erodes your sense of authentic self. You start to doubt your own instincts and preferences, internalizing their subtle corrections until you're no longer sure what truly belongs to you. A healthy relationship fosters individuality and celebrates personal expression, allowing you to flourish as your true self rather than subtly pruning you to fit someone else's ideal. Always undefined. You might notice a consistent pattern. Whenever the conversation shifts towards clarifying what this relationship actually is, they subtly deflect. It's not an outright refusal, but a masterful avoidance. Terms like exclusive, committed, or even what are we doing seem to make them uncomfortable, prompting vague responses or a quick change of subject. This creates a pervasive sense of ambiguity. You might find yourself constantly trying to read between the lines, looking for clues, or feeling like you're operating without a map. Their actions might suggest intimacy, but their words deliberately keep things nebulous, leaving you in a perpetual state of almost or maybe. The lack of definition isn't accidental. It allows them to maintain flexibility and avoid accountability while still enjoying the benefits of your connection. You're left feeling emotionally adrift, unable to plan, to fully invest, or even to understand your own standing. This constant state of being undefined keeps you in limbo. You hesitate to make plans, to introduce them fully, or to articulate your own needs because the very foundation of the relationship remains unacknowledged. A healthy connection offers clarity and a shared understanding of its boundaries and future, not a perpetual guessing game about its very existence. The perpetual victim. Some people seem to live in a constant state of being wronged. It's not about an occasional bad day or a true setback. With them, every single challenge somehow becomes a personal slight. Every inconvenience is just another sign that the world is conspiring against them. You'll hear about it often, how unfair their boss is, how unreliable their friends are, how life just keeps dealing them the worst possible hand. Even when good things happen, there's often a subtle twist, a reason why it could have been better, or a new problem that makes the good feel temporary. This creates a particular dynamic. Attempts to offer solutions are usually met with explanations for why those solutions simply won't work. Suggestions for moving forward are deflected or ignored. It's almost as if staying in the position of a victim is more comfortable, more familiar than actually working through the difficulty. This isn't about having empathy for someone who is genuinely struggling. It's about recognizing a consistent pattern, a repeated story where they are always the ones suffering, always at the mercy of outside forces. This constant posture makes it difficult to build a real connection, because every single conversation eventually turns back to their pain, their helplessness, their never-ending struggle. Push to open up. Some people don't ask for closeness, they demand it. You're still getting comfortable, still figuring out what feels safe to share, but they want access now, deeper thoughts, past wounds, private memories. They expect openness right away, without thinking about whether you're ready. And when you hesitate, they frame it like a flaw. You're guarded, you've got trust issues, you're sending mixed signals. The pressure doesn't come from shouting, it comes from silence, or jokes that land just a little too hard. From, "I just want to understand you," said like a test you're failing. So you start sharing things you're not ready to say out loud. Not because the trust is there, but because the tension is. Because it feels easier to give in than to explain why you're not ready. But real closeness can't be rushed. And if someone treats your boundaries like barriers to break through, they're not reaching for intimacy, they're reaching for control. The shrinking line. Respect forms the foundation of healthy relationships. Without it, everything else crumbles. When someone consistently disregards their partner's boundaries, values, and basic dignity, they're dismantling that foundation piece by piece. It shows up in the small violations first. Boundaries that were clearly stated get tested, then ignored. No becomes a starting point for negotiation rather than a complete sentence. Privacy gets invaded under the guise of curiosity or concern. Pressure mounts for things that were already declined, wrapped in guilt or logic designed to wear down resistance. The dismissiveness extends to core beliefs and values. Dreams get mocked as unrealistic. Important principles become targets for ridicule. Achievements get minimized while failures get magnified. What matters deeply to one person becomes ammunition for the other's amusement or control. These violations masquerade as jokes, concern, or even love. The boundary crossing gets framed as playfulness. The dismissiveness gets packaged as realism. But underneath lies a fundamental inability to see their partner as a separate person deserving of consideration. Living with this constant disregard creates exhaustion. Energy gets spent defending basic human rights that should be automatically honored. The relationship transforms from a source of support into a battleground for basic respect. What makes this particularly insidious is how it normalizes itself over time. Each violation makes the next seem less significant. Standards gradually lower to accommodate behavior that would have been unthinkable initially. Respect cannot be rationed or negotiated. Someone who consistently violates their partner's dignity reveals their fundamental view not as an equal deserving consideration, but as an obstacle to control. Absorbed identity. At first, sharing feels natural. You spend more time together. You sync up on habits. You start using we a little more often. It feels like connection. But slowly, it becomes harder to tell where your life ends and theirs begins. Plans that used to be yours now feel automatically shared. Decisions get made without checking if you wanted to be part of them. Even the way you talk starts to shift, less I, more we, even when the we wasn't something you chose. You try to stay flexible. You let little things slide. You don't want to seem distant or difficult. But somewhere in the background, your sense of self starts to blur, not in a dramatic way. Just in the kind of way that makes you pause when someone asks, "What do you want?" and you're not quite sure anymore. Sharing a life shouldn't mean losing track of yours. But when everything becomes ours by default, you stop reaching for the parts of yourself that used to feel separate and start wondering whether they're still there. Financial exploitation. You might notice a pattern where you are consistently bearing an unfair or even damaging financial burden in the relationship. This could manifest as them constantly borrowing money they never repay, pressuring you to pay for all shared expenses while they contribute little, or demanding you cover their personal debts or lavish spending. More severely, it might involve them secretly taking out loans or credit cards in your name, accumulating significant debt without your knowledge, or pressuring you to co-sign for things they then fail to pay. They might misuse joint funds, drain your savings, or even gamble away money designated for household needs. This creates a perilous situation for your financial future. You find your resources dwindling, your credit score plummeting, and your financial stability severely compromised, all due to their irresponsible or manipulative actions. Their financial choices become your liabilities. This pattern is a profound betrayal of trust, leaving you economically vulnerable and often in a worse financial position than before the relationship. A responsible relationship builds financial security together based on honesty and mutual contribution, not on one partner exploiting or burdening the other for their own gain or irresponsibility. The constant critic. In this relationship, your efforts, your appearance, your opinions, or even your very way of being are often met with a subtle, or sometimes not so subtle, stream of negative commentary. It might be disguised as helpful advice, a joke, or constructive criticism, but it consistently leaves you feeling diminished. They might point out flaws you hadn't noticed, dismiss your ideas with a scoff, or deliver backhanded compliments that feel more like insults. What starts as an isolated comment can become a pervasive atmosphere where you anticipate being picked apart no matter what you do. This constant stream of judgment creates a deep sense of inadequacy. You find yourself perpetually self-conscious, editing your words, your appearance, and even your thoughts, trying to avoid their critical gaze. Your confidence slowly erodes, and you begin to internalize their negative assessments. This pattern starves the relationship of positive affirmation and genuine acceptance. You stop feeling celebrated or even truly seen for who you are. A supportive relationship lifts you up and offers constructive feedback from a place of love, not a relentless, undermining stream of criticism that chips away at your self-worth. No accountability. You've noticed a consistent pattern. When problems arise in the relationship, or when they've made a mistake, responsibility for their part seems to vanish. It's never truly their fault. An explanation for their behavior is always ready. They were stressed, misunderstood, provoked by circumstances, or perhaps even by you. When confronted with the consequences of their actions, they become experts at deflection. The conversation shifts to what you did or how an external factor forced their hand. Their role in the issue is minimized, rationalized, or outright denied, leaving you holding the bag of blame or confusion. This creates a frustrating and unresolvable cycle. True resolution becomes impossible because the initial step of taking responsibility is always skipped. You find yourself arguing over the very facts of what happened, rather than addressing the impact of their actions. This pattern profoundly erodes trust. You learn that their actions will never truly be their own burden to carry. A healthy relationship requires both individuals to acknowledge their contributions to problems, offering genuine accountability rather than a constant stream of excuses and blame shifting. Placeholder position. You might find yourself in a relationship where, despite being present, you feel a distinct lack of genuine integration into their life. You're there when it's convenient, when they need company, or when certain social situations require a partner, but the feeling of being truly essential, truly chosen for who you are, is absent. It's as if you occupy a role rather than a genuine partnership. Their life proceeds with you in a designated slot, but you rarely feel like an active, considered participant in their decisions, their deeper thoughts, or their core plans. They might make significant choices without consulting you or share important news with others before you. This creates a subtle but persistent sense of being interchangeable. You might worry that if you weren't there, someone else could easily step into your spot without much disruption to their fundamental existence. You're a part of their picture, but perhaps not truly etched into its core. This feeling of being a placeholder rather than a prioritized partner is deeply unfulfilling. You provide companionship and support, but receive little of the reciprocal sense of being truly valued or central. A genuine partnership builds on mutual centrality and intentional inclusion, not on filling a convenient vacant position, waiting for the good days. In some relationships, there are periods that feel truly wonderful. These are the good days, times when the connection feels strong, communication flows easily, and you feel genuinely happy and supported. These moments can be so powerful, so fulfilling that they become what you hold on to. But then, things shift. The difficult patterns return, the distance creeps back in, or the challenges resurface. The relationship becomes hard again, perhaps even painful. Yet, because you've experienced those good days, you cling to the hope that they will reappear. You endure the harder times, reminding yourself of how good it can be, how good it was. This makes you tolerant of behaviors you otherwise wouldn't accept. You might minimize current hurts, make excuses, or put your own needs aside, all for the possibility of returning to that better state. You keep waiting, keep hoping, pouring energy into the expectation that the person or the dynamic will revert to its best version. This pattern can become a cycle of enduring hardship for fleeting moments of joy. It keeps you stuck in a loop, always looking backward or forward to a better time, rather than truly addressing the reality of the present. The hope of those good days makes it incredibly difficult to face the consistent truth of the relationship as it actually exists. Minimize moments. When you have good news, something genuinely exciting to share, you naturally turn to your partner, hoping for a moment of shared celebration. You might have achieved a personal goal, received recognition, or experienced a small, heartfelt triumph. But instead of the mirrored enthusiasm you anticipate, their response is strikingly subdued. A quick, "Oh, that's fine," or a casual, "Yeah, well, that happens," might be all you get. They don't engage with your excitement, don't ask about the details that made it special for you. There's a subtle but distinct lack of genuine warmth, a quiet dampening of your moment in the spotlight. This creates a peculiar sense of isolation, right in the middle of your own joy. You arrive eager to share, only to leave feeling unexpectedly deflated, almost as if you were silly for having felt so happy. It subtly teaches you to temper your own enthusiasm, to soften your accomplishments, or even to stop bringing them up entirely within the relationship. This consistent pattern, where your triumphs are quietly shrunk, slowly undermines your confidence and your sense of worth. It feels as if your happiness is somehow inconvenient, or simply not as important to them as it is to you. A truly supportive relationship celebrates your wins and acknowledges your milestones, validating your joy rather than subtly diminishing it. Lonely together. There's a strange, often disquieting paradox that can arise in human connections. The company of another person can, at times, deepen your sense of solitude. You might be physically present with them, perhaps a partner or a close friend, yet experience a more profound isolation than when you are truly alone. Conversations frequently skim the surface, hovering around trivialities without ever dipping into a place of genuine connection. You might attempt to share something meaningful, only to be met with a blank stare, an abrupt change of topic, or a response that utterly misses your point. It feels as if your thoughts and feelings are bouncing off an invisible wall. This isn't necessarily about open conflict or tension. Instead, it's a pervasive absence of true engagement. You share space, perhaps even activities, but that vital sense of being truly seen or heard remains elusive. Moments of shared laughter or mutual understanding become rare, fleeting. In their place settles a quiet emptiness, distinct from peace. This experience can be profoundly unsettling. The stark contrast between the expectation of companionship and the harsh reality of emotional distance becomes glaringly apparent. You may find yourself actively seeking out your actual alone time, preferring the honesty of true solitude. To feel profoundly isolated while in someone's company can be one of the most disheartening forms of loneliness. On-demand access. Some people treat closeness like a constant line that should never go unanswered. If you're together, they expect to reach you any time. A text, a call, a check-in. Not as a question, but as a rule. You tell yourself it's just their way of staying connected, But it doesn't feel like a conversation, it feels like monitoring. You start checking your phone more often, giving updates that weren't asked for, thinking ahead to when they might reach out and what might happen if you don't respond fast enough. It becomes easier to stay available than to explain why you weren't. You organize your time around their moods, not because you're being controlled, but because it avoids another argument about feeling ignored. And the more you accommodate it, the more normal it starts to feel. Like being reachable is part of proving you care. But connection isn't constant presence. It's trust that doesn't need a timestamp. Conditional acceptance. You experience moments of genuine warmth and closeness in this relationship, but they feel selective. There are parts of you, your humor, your shared interests, perhaps a certain confidence that they embrace completely. In those moments, you feel seen and loved. However, there are other aspects of yourself that meet with a distinct coolness, a subtle disapproval, or even overt criticism. Perhaps it's a deeply held belief they don't share, a passion they don't understand, a vulnerability they can't tolerate, or an emotional response they deem too much. When these parts emerge, their warmth recedes, replaced by distance, judgment, or an attempt to subtly change you. This creates an unspoken agreement. You are accepted, but only certain curated parts of you. You learn to compartmentalize yourself, to present only the agreeable facets, and to keep the unacceptable pieces hidden away. The joy of connection becomes intertwined with the anxiety of self-censorship. This pattern, where only fragments of your true self are embraced, prevents genuine intimacy. It leaves you feeling like you constantly have to perform, unable to relax into being fully yourself. A healthy relationship offers unconditional acceptance for the whole person, not just the convenient or agreeable parts, allowing you to be truly authentic without fear of losing connection. Shrinking circles. One of the most insidious red flags is when someone begins systematically cutting their partner off from friends, family, and the outside world. It rarely announces itself as control. Instead, it arrives disguised as love, concern, or protection. It starts with subtle commentary. Friends become bad influences who don't really care about the relationship. Family members don't understand what the couple has together. Co-workers are just trying to cause drama. These observations come wrapped in apparent devotion. They just want what's best. They just care so much. They just see things others miss. The progression is gradual but relentless. Invitations get declined on behalf of both partners. Plans with others somehow always conflict with something more important. Social gatherings become sources of tension before, during, and after. The message becomes clear. Time spent with others is time stolen from the relationship. When resistance appears, the manipulation intensifies. Guilt arrives first. Why would anyone need other people when they have everything they need right here? Then come accusations of disloyalty, suggestions of infidelity, or claims that friends are poisoning the relationship. The partner is forced to choose repeatedly between their social connections and peace at home. The world begins to shrink in measurable ways. Weekly coffee dates disappear. Holiday traditions with family become optional, then forgotten entirely. Phone calls get shorter and less frequent. Social media interactions dwindle. Eventually, the only approved relationships are ones that pose no threat, people who barely know the isolated partner or who reinforce the controller's narrative. What makes this particularly devastating is how it disguises itself as special intimacy. The isolation gets framed as romantic exclusivity, as having a love so complete that nothing else matters. But genuine love expands a person's world. It doesn't contract it. Healthy partners encourage outside relationships because they understand that connection with others enriches rather than threatens their bond. The ultimate goal becomes clear in the isolation's completeness. With support systems severed, there's nowhere to turn when problems arise. No outside perspective to provide reality checks. No safe harbor when the relationship becomes destructive. The isolated partner becomes entirely dependent on someone who has already demonstrated their willingness to systematically eliminate anyone who might offer help. Because isolation is never about love, it's about control. And someone who deliberately severs their partner's lifelines is revealing exactly how they intend to use that power. These red flags aren't diagnoses. They're not proof of anything. They're patterns. Small, repeated dynamics that shape how safe you feel, often without a single clear moment to point to. What unfolds isn't loud or dramatic. It's subtle, a slow erosion. The second guessing, the shrinking, the silence. Clarity doesn't arrive all at once, but once it does, you can finally breathe again. And if you're navigating these feelings yourself, know that a video can't replace real support. A therapist or counselor can help you untangle things at a deeper level. This channel exists for reflection, for the thoughts that only surface late at night. So if this helped you name something quiet, you're in the right place.